Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're zoning in on something that, well, it often flies under the radar, but it's actually become a huge tool in corporate strategy. I'm talking about the press release, our mission, a real deep dive into corporate accountability. We want to figure out why this short, sharp public statement is suddenly so critical for talking about ethics, social impact, and environmental wins.
Exactly. We're trying to cut through some of the noise here because when we talk about modern corporate accountability, we're really talking about ESG criteria. That's environmental, social, and governance factors.
Right.
And these aren't just, nice to haves anymore. They're pretty essential for figuring out if a business is genuinely sustainable, if it's ethical, and frankly, if stakeholders should even trust it.
Okay, so that gets us right to the heart of it. We all know companies put out those massive, like 200-page sustainability reports, super dense, tons of data. But why are we saying the short, punchy press release might actually matter more right now?
Well, the key thing here is speed equals scrutiny. Think about it. That 200-page report, it can sit on a digital shelf, maybe behind a paywall, for ages before anyone really digs in.
True.
But a press release, bang, it's out there, instantly accessible. And it's immediately getting picked apart by analysts, journalists, big investors.
So it's about the immediate, very public accountability of forces.
Absolutely. A press release makes the company boil down its ESG story into something concise, something newsworthy, and hopefully something verifiable. It gets commitments out there fast. And crucially, it builds credibility because the company's basically saying, here it is, judge us now. It shows confidence, not burying data in some appendix nobody reads.
Okay, let's unpack this then. If the press release is where the reputation battle is really happening right now, what exactly needs to be in it? We've got those three pillars: environmental, social, governance. Let's start with E.
Right, environmental. The E. This is often the easiest one to get your hands around, the most tangible, you could say. So it forms the backbone of a lot of these releases. And companies aren't just talking vague goals anymore. They're announcing actual quantifiable achievements. Things like cutting carbon, switching to renewables, saving water.
Yeah, we've seen those get super specific. Like, we achieved a 25% cut in Scope 1 and 2 emissions.
Hold on, though, for anyone listening who's maybe hearing that for the first time. Scope 1 and 2, why are those specific categories so important for credibility?
That's a great question. It's vital context, really. Think of emissions in, like, three main buckets. Scope 1. That's the stuff a company makes directly. The fuel they burn in their own trucks, the emissions from their factories, that kind of thing.
Okay, direct control.
Exactly. Scope 2 is indirect. It's from the energy they buy. So the electricity powering their offices or plants.
Got it. So if a company shouts about cutting Scope 1 and 2, they're proving they're tackling the pollution they create directly, and they're making better choices about the energy they purchase. Precisely. That specificity shows real operational control and intent. If they just vaguely said we cut carbon, well, maybe they just sold off a polluting factory. Scope 1 and 2 show improvement in the actual core business.
Makes sense. Let's move to S then, social impact. This feels less about, smokestacks and more about people.
Yeah, the S pillar is all about the impact on people, employees, the communities they operate in, society more broadly. This is where you see announcements about hitting diversity targets or improvements in worker safety stats, or maybe changes to ensure ethical labor practices down the supply chain. Companies often share hard numbers here too, like workforce demographics, how many hours of training employees got, or maybe total charitable giving. It's about showing they value the humans involved.
Which leads us to G, governance. Often feels like the least glamorous pillar, but maybe the most critical for long-term health. How do you make announcing board rules sound newsworthy in a press release?
Yeah, that's the challenge, isn't it? Governance gets into the nitty-gritty, the ethical plumbing and structure of the company. Announcements here might be about changes to the board, say, bringing in more independent directors, or maybe new exec pay rules that are tied directly to hitting ESG targets. They might announce new anti-corruption training, better transparency policies, or maybe setting up a new ethics committee.
So it sounds like G announcements are less about general PR and maybe more targeted at investors, signaling lower risk.
That's definitely a key strategic angle. When a company announces, say, beefed up anti-corruption measures, it's telling investors, look, our internal structure is solid. We're managing this potential legal or financial risk. But the real power comes when you see commitment across all three pillars. It builds that complete picture, that narrative of a company that's stable, responsible, and thinking long-term.
Right. You can't just whisper sweet nothings about sustainability anymore. You need proof.
Yeah.
And this is where it gets really interesting, I think, how specificity turns these vague promises into something solid, something trustworthy.
It really does. It's the massive difference between saying, oh yeah, we care about the climate, versus putting out a release that says, we've officially committed to the Science-Based Targets Initiative, the SBTI, and here's our progress tracking against our 2030 goal of X% reduction.
Okay, SBTI. What exactly is that, and why is announcing you're part of it considered such a gold standard in a press release?
So the Science-Based Targets Initiative, it's essentially a third-party stamp of approval. It checks that a company's climate goals are actually ambitious enough that they line up with what the latest climate science says we need to do to meet the Paris Agreement goals. So when a company uses a press release to say, we've committed to SBTI-validated targets, they're not just making a fluffy promise, they're basically submitting their homework to be graded externally, very publicly.
Like Microsoft did, right? They used a press release to announce that huge goal, carbon negative by 2030. That felt very verifiable because it was tied to this external standard.
Exactly. And those kinds of net zero commitments, when announced like that, do a few things. They signal serious long-term strategy to investors who are increasingly worried about climate transition risk. Plus, they help attract talent and customers who care about this stuff. Look at Unilever, they announced via press release hitting 100% renewable electricity across 5 continents. The sheer specificity, 100%, and that global scale. That made it verifiable and, frankly, pretty impressive.
So it's not just about reporting what you did. Press releases are also key for talking about future plans, policy changes, and maybe most importantly, managing risks before they blow up, showing you're proactive.
Absolutely. Proactivity is huge. We're seeing companies use press releases to announce things like new due diligence procedures in their supply chains, basically, checking more carefully for ethical risks, or adopting really specific human rights policies. And increasingly important now are announcements about climate risk assessment frameworks, explaining how the company is actually analyzing and planning to manage both the physical risk of climate change and the risk of transitioning to a low-carbon economy.
And using these announcements to show you're getting in line with regulations, that seems vital too. You're basically saying, we see these global standards coming and we're ready.
Yeah, this is where aligning with global standards becomes really strategic. Companies are increasingly using press releases to explicitly state they're adopting frameworks like the TCFD, that's the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or getting ready for the EU's big one, the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive.
Whoa, hang on. TCFD, CSRD. That sounds like alphabet soup for regulations.
Yeah.
For listeners, what's the key difference? And what's a company signaling when they announce they're adopting one?
Good point. Easy to get lost in the acronyms. Okay, so TCFD is primarily focused on climate risk disclosure. Announcing your TCFD-aligned signals that you're being transparent about how climate change could hit your finances, your strategy, your governance. It's about financial risk. CSRD from the EU is much, much broader. It's a massive piece of regulation forcing large companies to report really extensively on a wide range of environmental and social impacts and governance issues. It's far more comprehensive.
Okay, so CSRD alignment signals you're preparing for some of the toughest, broadest sustainability rules anywhere in the world. That's got to boost investor confidence, right?
Correct. Big time. And the timing of these announcements is everything. Smart companies use press releases strategically to get ahead of these mandatory deadlines. It shows they're anticipating change, not just reacting when forced. It reinforces that image of being a responsible, well-managed company that's on top of its obligations, not just scrambling to comply later. That signals sophisticated risk management.
Okay, let's make this concrete for everyone listening. Maybe look at a couple of examples of companies doing this well. First up, the luxury group Richemont.
Yeah, Richemont is interesting because they show that even brands built on, heritage and exclusivity have to play the transparency game now. They use press releases pretty effectively to detail specific carbon reduction numbers across their different luxury houses, their maisons, and they made a point of highlighting their progress towards those SBTI commitments we talked about. They managed to provide concrete ESG data without diluting their high-end brand image.
Okay, and maybe contrast that with a tech giant like Lenovo. They seem to hit both the social side and the importance of outside validation hard.
Exactly. Lenovo put out details about hitting 90% renewable electricity globally, which, for a company that size, is a huge operational achievement. But at the same time, they also communicated key diversity and inclusion numbers. But here's the kicker, I think. They made sure to include third-party validation right there in the release. They mention getting recognized by CDP, that's a major climate disclosure platform, and being listed on the Dow Jones Sustainability Indices. They weren't just saying we're good, they were showing who else agreed they were good. That carries a ton of weight, especially with professional investors.
Okay, so let's distill this down. For you, the listener, whether you're trying to write one of these ESG press releases or just trying to figure out if one you're reading is actually meaningful, what are the key best practices we've pulled out?
Right, let's nail these down. We've got about 6 essential things to look for. First, always lead with the quantifiable data. Start with the hard numbers. Reduced emissions by 32%, not just fuzzy intentions.
Okay, numbers first.
Second, use industry standard frameworks to structure the information. You mentioned GRI and SSB earlier.
Yeah, maybe a quick definition on those two. They pop up a lot.
Sure. So GRI, Global Reporting Initiative, that's kind of the big comprehensive global standard for all sorts of sustainability reporting, very widely used. SSB's Sustainability Accounting Standards Board is a bit different. It focuses very specifically on the sustainability topics that are most likely to impact financial performance, and it does that industry by industry. Using these shows, you're following accepted methods.
Got it. Standard frameworks. Third, based on Lenovo, that third-party verification seems almost essential now.
Oh, absolutely, including independent audits, certifications, recognitions like from CDP or having your targets SBTI validated. That's crucial for credibility. Fourth, be crystal clear about baseline years and target dates for any goals you mention. Makes them real.
Right, measurable over time.
Fifth, provide context. Don't just throw out a number. How does it compare to last year? How does it compare to others in your industry? Is it actually leadership or just catching up?
And finally, that communication tightrope. Avoid the jargon, but keep the technical accuracy.
Yes, that's so important. The release needs to work for different audiences. A journalist needs a clear headline. A climate expert needs the real data. A financial analyst needs the risk implications. So simplify the language where you can, but don't dumb down the core information or lose the rigor.
Okay, so pulling it all together, what does this really mean? It feels like the corporate press release has shifted. It's not just, marketing fluff trying to grab a quick headline anymore. It's actually become this critical financial, ethical, strategic document. Get it right, and it builds trust, shows foresight, and maybe even directly impacts the company's value and long-term survival.
That's really the bottom line, I think. Press releases and solid, transparent ESG reporting are now completely intertwined. They're essential parts of modern corporate communication. Stakeholders, investors, employees, customers, they expect regular, honest updates. So companies really need to bake press releases into their whole ESG reporting process now and see them as a core part of their strategy, not just an afterthought.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener, to maybe mull over. If a company only shares its detailed ESG data in that massive, dense annual report and seems to actively shy away from putting clear, concise, verifiable highlights into a public press release, well, what might that choice suggest about their real confidence in the achievements they're actually disclosing?